There's a specific kind of dread that settles into your bones when you're a grandfather. It's different from any fear I felt when I was young. When you're young, fear is sharp and fast, it hits you and you react. But when you're older, when you've buried your son and you're the only thing standing between two small children and a world that doesn't always protect them, fear becomes something else entirely. It becomes a weight, something slow and grinding that you carry with you every single day, and you can't name it, and you can't explain it to anyone. And God knows you've tried. I tried to explain it to my attorney. I tried to explain it to my daughter. I even tried to explain it to my priest, who is a good man and a patient one. None of them could do anything with what I was telling them, because what I was telling them wasn't evidence. It wasn't a fact or a document or a bruise you could photograph. It was just a feeling. A 63-year-old man's feeling that something was deeply, terribly wrong with his grandchildren. And nobody takes that to court. My son passed away 26 months before any of this happened. He had a heart condition we didn't know about. He was 41 years old, and he was coaching his daughter's soccer team on a Tuesday evening in October, and then he was gone. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye. The kind of loss that rewrites your entire understanding of how the world works, because you spend 60 years believing that the natural order means parents bury children only in the rarest, cruelest exceptions, and then it happens to you, and you realize the world never promised you any such thing. He left behind 2 children. My granddaughter was 8 at the time. My grandson was 11. And he left behind a wife, my daughter-in-law, who I had always found difficult but had always tried to love, because she was the mother of my grandchildren and she had made my son happy, and those 2 things were enough for me for a long time. After my son died, she grieved. I watched her grieve, and it seemed real to me, and I gave her every benefit of every doubt I had. I helped with the children. I drove 4 hours each way, every other weekend, to be there. I took my grandson to his baseball games. I helped my granddaughter with her science projects. I did what grandfathers do. Then, about 8 months after my son died, she met someone. I found out through my grandson, who mentioned it casually the way children mention things they don't fully understand, the way they hand you a grenade without knowing what it is. He said there was a man named Derek who came over sometimes for dinner, that Derek had a loud laugh, that Derek had given him a pocket knife, which was the kind of gift that should have made me feel something right then, though I couldn't say exactly what. I did not say anything negative. I told myself she was young and alone and she had every right to find companionship. I told myself what I needed to tell myself to stay in those children's lives without creating conflict that might push me out of them. They married 11 months after my son was buried. I was not invited to the wedding. I found out about it afterward, also from my grandson. Also in that casual, devastating way, children deliver the worst news. After that, the visits became harder to arrange. There were always reasons. Derek had a family event. The children were sick. My daughter-in-law was taking them somewhere for the weekend. I started writing everything down, every cancellation, every rescheduled visit, every time I called and the phone rang out. My attorney told me I had grounds to go back to court to formalize the visitation arrangement, because what we had was informal, and informal arrangements are only as good as the goodwill behind them. We filed the paperwork. My daughter-in-law was not happy about it. That was when the coldness started in earnest. She stopped returning my calls directly and started sending text messages instead, short, clipped things that told me exactly what I needed to know without a single extra word. The children's calls became shorter. My granddaughter, who used to talk to me for 40 minutes about her drawings and her friends and the books she was reading, started saying she was tired. My grandson started sounding far away, like he was talking to me from the other side of something thick. I asked him once, about 6 weeks before Christmas, whether everything was okay at home. There was a pause that lasted too long for a 12-year-old responding to a simple question. He said yes. He said it the way people say fine when they mean anything, but I asked him if he was sure, and he said yes again, and I heard something in the background, a door, or maybe a voice, something that made him change in an instant, and he said he had to go, and the call ended. I sat with that call for 3 days. 2 weeks before Christmas, my daughter-in-law called me. She said she was taking the children to her mother's house for the holidays. She said they would be there from December 21st through the new year. She said there was no point in me making the drive up for my usual visit because the house would be empty. She said this in a tone that suggested she was being generous in telling me at all. She said, "Don't come until January 2nd at the earliest. She'd let me know." I said okay. I thanked her. I hung up and I sat very still for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I am not a dramatic person. I am not the kind of man who manufactures crises or sees shadows where there are none. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer. I deal in what I can measure and verify. When I tell you that everything in me, everything said that my grandchildren were not going to their grandmother's house, that is not an old man's anxiety talking. That is 31 years of training myself to read the difference between what I'm being told and what is actually true. She'd made one small mistake. She said her mother's house. Her mother died 4 years ago. I had sent flowers to the funeral. I gave it 4 days. I told myself maybe she'd misspoken. Maybe she meant her aunt or a friend she called family. I called my grandson's cell phone on December 23rd and it went straight to voicemail. I called my granddaughter's phone and got the same. I called my daughter-in-law and she answered on the third ring, sounded slightly breathless, and told me everyone was fine and having a wonderful time and she'd have the kids call me when they had a moment. They didn't call. On December 27th, I got in my car at 4 in the morning and I drove 4 hours north. I want to tell you what that drive felt like. I want to tell you that I was calm and logical and I had a plan. The truth is, I had nothing. I had a bad feeling and an address and 4 hours in the dark with nothing but my own thoughts for company. I rehearsed what I would say if I arrived and everything was normal. I practiced being embarrassed. I thought about how my daughter-in-law would look at me with that particular expression she had, and I thought about swallowing that and apologizing and driving 4 hours home with my tail between my legs, and I decided I could live with that. I could live with being wrong. I could not live with being right and having done nothing. I pulled onto their street a little after 8 in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet the way suburban neighborhoods are quiet on late December mornings, that particular stillness that is peaceful when everything is fine and feels like a held breath when it isn't. I slowed down before I reached their house. Both cars were in the driveway. I parked 2 houses down. I sat there for a long moment and looked at those 2 cars and felt the weight I'd been carrying for months settle into something heavier and colder than it had ever been before. If they were at her mother's house, if they were anywhere at all, someone would have driven them there. Those cars should not be there. The front curtains were drawn. The house looked still. I got out of my car and I walked up the driveway, and I was trying to decide whether to knock on the front door or go around back first, when I heard something. It came from the garage. Our separated, detached garage that sat about 20 feet behind the house, connected to the backyard by a concrete path. It was a sound I almost didn't recognize at first because I wasn't expecting it, because it took my brain a moment to process what my ears were telling it. It was my grandson's voice. He wasn't shouting. It was worse than shouting. It was this thin, high sound, almost rhythmic, like he'd been doing it so long it had become automatic. A sound a person makes when they've stopped expecting anyone to hear them. I moved. I don't have a clear memory of deciding to move. One moment I was standing in the driveway, and the next I was at the garage door, and it was padlocked, a heavy combination lock I had never seen before, and I am not a man who breaks things easily. But I went to the side of the garage where I knew there was a small window, and I looked through it, and I saw my grandson sitting on the concrete floor in the far corner. He was 12 years old. He was wearing a thin jacket over pajamas. It was 31 degrees outside. There was a length of heavy chain attached to a bolt in the wall, and at the end of that chain was a padlock, and that padlock was attached to a thick zip tie fastened around his left ankle. I put my fist through the window. I don't remember deciding to do that either. I got the window open enough to reach in and find the interior latch, and I pushed the side door open, and I went to him, and I put my hands on his face, and I said his name, and he looked at me the way people look when they've been in the dark so long they've forgotten what light is supposed. to feel like, he said, "Grandpa," just that, just my name for myself in his mouth, and I cannot describe what that did to me, so I won't try. I told him I was going to get him out. I looked at the chain. It was padlocked to the bolt and padlocked to the zip tie at his ankle, two separate locks I didn't have keys to. I told him to hold on, and I went back to the window where I'd broken the glass, and I found a piece of metal shelving unit, and I used it to work on the bolt in the wall, which was screwed in and not welded, and after about 4 minutes I got it loose enough to pull free, and the chain came with it. He stood up. He wobbled, and I caught him and I held him for a moment that I will carry with me for the rest of whatever years I have left. Then he said, "Grandpa, don't look in the back corner." I pulled back and looked at his face. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the floor. I said, "Why not?" He said, "I don't want you to." And I knew with the same bone-deep knowing that had driven me 4 hours north in the dark that I had to look, that whatever was in that back corner was the thing I had been feeling for months without being able to name it. The garage had one of those old wooden storage shelving units along the back wall, floor to ceiling, the kind that collects decades of holiday decorations and forgotten tools and paint cans. Someone had moved the bottom shelf unit, a large section of it, maybe 4 feet wide out from the wall slightly, enough to create a gap. Tucked in behind it was a smaller space, maybe 3 feet wide and 4 feet deep, recessed slightly into a nook where the drywall had never been finished. There was a sleeping bag on the floor. There was a small plastic bucket in the corner. There was a child's cup, the kind with a lid and a straw. And along the baseboard, at the very bottom of the exposed drywall, scratched into the paper with something sharp, were 2 things that I will see until the day I die. A name, my granddaughter's name. And beside it, a series of small vertical marks in groups of 5 the way prisoners count days. I counted them twice. I counted 39 marks. My granddaughter was 9 years old. She had been kept in that space for 39 days. I looked at my grandson. He still wasn't looking at me. His jaw was working like he was trying to find the shape of words that didn't exist. I said, "Where is she?" He made a sound that I cannot describe. It was the sound of a child who has been holding something so large for so long that when it finally comes out, there's nothing left. He told me. It took a long time for him to tell me, and I am going to spare you the way he told me, because the way he told me the pieces of it, the gaps in it, the things he apologized for in the middle of telling me was the worst part. What he told me was that 3 days before I arrived, my granddaughter had become very sick, that she had been running a fever for more than a week, that he had begged Derek to get her a doctor every day, and every day Derek had said she was fine, she was faking. This was what happened when children misbehaved and needed to learn their lesson. She stopped waking up on December 24th. Derek had moved her. My grandson did not know where. He only knew she had been carried out wrapped in a blanket at 2 in the morning, and after that he had heard his mother crying for a long time, and then everything had gone quiet. I called 911. I called them while I was standing in that garage with my arm around my grandson's shoulders. I told them my name and the address. I told them what I had found. I told them there was a chain and 2 padlocks and a name scratched into drywall and 39 marks beside it. I told them to send everyone. While I waited, I used my phone to photograph everything in that garage. Every inch of it. The bolt hole in the wall, the chain, the marks on the baseboard, the sleeping bag, the bucket, my grandson's face, and I asked his permission before I did that, and he nodded. And that nod is something I carry with me too. The police arrived in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. I know because I was counting. What happened after that moved both very quickly and very slowly, in the way that serious things tend to move. 2 officers went to the front door. I heard the knock, and then I heard my daughter-in-law's voice startled, then alarmed, then something shifting into a register I hadn't heard from her before, something pleading and performative at once. Derek came out of the house seconds later, and there were 3 officers between him and any exit before he made it off the porch. They searched the house. They searched Derek's truck. They found my granddaughter's body in the truck bed, wrapped in a tarp and covered with bags of mulch that had been sitting in the truck since fall. She had been there for 3 days. I will not tell you everything the medical examiner found, because I do not think it serves any purpose to lay out every detail of what she had been through. What I will tell you is that the examiner determined she had been subjected to prolonged physical abuse, that the immediate cause of death was a combination of severe dehydration, untreated pneumonia, and hypothermia, and that there was documentable evidence that the abuse had been ongoing for significantly longer than 39 days, since the summer, they believed, since approximately a week after school let out for the year. My daughter-in-law told the detectives that Derek believed in strict discipline, that my granddaughter had been difficult, that things had gotten out of hand. She said this. She sat in an interview room and she said this about her 9-year-old daughter. Derek told them nothing. Derek sat across from 2 detectives and stared at the wall and said he wanted a lawyer, and that was the last thing he said for a long time. My grandson stayed with me from that day forward. The logistics of that, the emergency custody filing, the hearings, the weeks of paperwork are not the story I'm telling here, though I will tell you it was a battle, and I am glad I had an attorney who believed me before any of this happened, who had been building a file for months. Sometimes the preparation you do when you're afraid you're overreacting is the exact preparation that saves a life. In my grandson's case, I genuinely believe we got there in time. 3 days? If I had waited until January 2nd, as I'd been told, he would have been in that garage for 6 more days. I don't let myself finish that thought very often. The trial took 14 months. I attended every single day. My grandson did not attend. I would not have allowed that, and his therapist would not have allowed it either, and for once everyone agreed on something without a fight. My daughter-in-law and Derek were tried separately. Both trials ended the same way. Derek was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of felony child abuse, 1 count of unlawful imprisonment, and several additional charges I won't list here. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 45 years for the remaining charges. The 45 years was a formality, given the life sentences. But I watched the judge say every single year out loud, and I did not look away. My daughter-in-law was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder, the prosecution argued, and the jury agreed that her failure to act and her active concealment of the abuse made her equally responsible for both children's deaths, because my granddaughter's death was the direct consequence of denied medical care, and my grandson's imprisonment in that garage was something she had known about and participated in. She received life with the possibility of parole, with a minimum of 35 years before eligibility. She is 51 years old. She will be 86 before she can even ask to leave. I am 63. I hope I live long enough to stand in front of a parole board and remind them what was found in that garage. My grandson is 13 now. He has a therapist he has been seeing twice a week since last January, a young woman who is extraordinarily good at her job, and I am grateful for her every single day. He is doing what the people around him, carefully, cautiously, are beginning to call well. He plays baseball again. He is back in school. He has a friend he talks about constantly, a kid from down the street who apparently shares his taste in terrible action movies and spends more time at my house than his own, which I actively encourage. Noise and mess, and the chaos of a 13-year-old social life is the most beautiful thing in the world to me right now. He still has nightmares. He wakes up sometimes and doesn't know where he is, and I hear him from my room and I go sit with him until he remembers. We don't talk about the nightmares directly. His therapist says that's appropriate for now, that we follow his lead, that healing is not linear and there is no schedule for it. But sometimes, when the nightmares are less frequent for a stretch, he lets himself be a kid. And I watch him be a kid, loud and careless, and hungry every 40 minutes the way 12 and 13-year-old boys are always hungry. And I think about the names scratched into that baseboard and the 39 marks beside them, and I feel 2 things simultaneously that I have never fully learned to separate. One of them is grief so complete it has no edges. The other is gratitude so fierce it frightens me. I want to say something directly, because I think there may be people listening to this who are carrying what I was carrying in the months before December 27th. That specific dread. That bone weight that doesn't have a name and can't be put in front of a judge. Listen to it anyway. I know it feels like you're overreacting. I know the people around you will tell you you're overreacting. I know the legal system will tell you that a feeling is not evidence and that until you have something concrete, there is nothing to file and nothing to act on. Document everything regardless. Write down every canceled visit, every clipped text message, every phone call that ends too quickly. Write it down with dates and times. Build the file even when building the file feels like tilting at windmills. And if you ever get a phone call that sounds the way my grandson's call sounded to me, that pause that goes on too long, that yes, that means anything but, that call that ends because something in the background changed. Pay attention to it. Thanks for watching. Until next time, pay attention to it more than you pay attention to anybody telling you that you're overreacting or interfering or making things difficult. I went 4 hours north on a feeling, on a dead woman's name and 39 marks on a baseboard, on a 12-year-old's voice doing what voices do when they've stopped expecting anyone to hear them. My granddaughter's name was Clara. She was 9 years old. She liked drawing horses. She had a gap between her front teeth that she had been waiting to grow into. She made my son laugh like nobody else ever made him laugh. And when he died, she made a card for me out of construction paper that said, "We still have each other, Grandpa," in her round, uneven 9-year-old handwriting. And I have that card in my nightstand, and I have read it more times than I can count. "We still have each other," she said. I carry her with me every day. I carry the marks on the baseboard. I carry the 39 days I didn't know about and couldn't stop, and I carry the one day, just one, that I was in time for. I think about that card. I think about the word still, the particular weight of it, the particular stubborn hope of it, written by a child who had just lost her father and was already reaching for what remained. I am still here. My grandson is still here. We are still, in the way she meant it, each other's. I keep her drawing. I keep the card. I keep showing up. That's all any of us can do, in the end. Show up. Show up early. Show up when someone tells you not to. Show up when every reasonable voice in your head says you might be wrong, because the one unreasonable voice that says something is wrong has a way of being the only one that matters. Show up. If this story reached you, if some part of what I've said landed somewhere it needed to land, please leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking. I read every single one. And if there's someone in your life you've been meaning to check on, someone your gut has been nudging you toward, please don't wait until January 2nd. Go now.